Well, hello everybody, and thank you for taking the opportunity to join us as we discuss the rough draft and its role in the research process with a focus on both what it is and why we complete a rough draft. So as we begin our short time together, we're going to really take a look at three objectives, and I've identified them as questions to consider. And the first is, what is a rough draft? Secondly, why is a rough draft important? And third, what should the rough draft contain? So those are going to be our three elements of focus for our time together. And as we begin, let's start with what is a rough draft. And what we have to remember when we're starting to develop the rough draft, this is where our writing is starting to come together. So the rough draft is the first step of the writing process. And I say first step because up until this point in time, you've identified your topic, you've defended your topic, you've presented the sources that you're going to utilize, and now you are beyond those initial phases of writing, and you're starting to go ahead and develop your work. You're starting to pull everything together. So as we move beyond those elements of source identification and analysis, this is where we're pulling all our ideas together. You're assembling those ideas in a coherent format that reflects the working outline that you've developed while completing your research. What we want to consider with the rough draft is the fact that you are now, as I referenced, putting ideas together. You're taking them off of your outline that you've had as you moved forward, and now you're composing your thoughts. You're developing your thoughts to ultimately see where you are at within that research process. When we focus on what is a rough draft, there is something we want to keep in mind, and that is the fact that the rough draft is rough. And I put that in quotes because it's very important. The rough draft is not meant to be perfect. Perfection is not expected. It's meant to be rough. It's meant to see where you're at. It's meant to convey to your instructor where you are at and also where you are going. And we'll expand upon that idea here in a few minutes. But again, perfection is not expected in the rough draft. And I would also note that it really shouldn't be present either, because it would be practically impossible to have a perfect rough draft, because it really defies what the rough draft is. Again, it is rough. Now, why is the rough draft important? Well, as I referenced on the previous slide, it gives you the opportunity to begin the process of formulating your thoughts. And when we talk about formulating thoughts, we're going from these ideas related to topic development, related to proposal, related to the purpose for your research and what you hope to accomplish, and making sure your research questions focused in those initial stages and identifying sources, to now putting everything together. Those earlier elements that I referenced before are now moving beyond those ideas. You are now going to see what gaps you have in your work. You're going to know when you start to formulate your ideas, do I have enough sources? Do I have too many sources that focus on one aspect, but now I have this other gap over here, and now my research question is a little out of sync. So now I need to refine my research question, and then I can focus on source location again, because I need to circle back to that idea. You can also see where you're overly heavy in your research. All of these ideas are related to the gaps that you may have in your work. It's also important because at the academic level, you can now demonstrate your progress to the instructor thus far. Because remember, they've only seen bits and pieces of your work. They've only seen the sources you're going to utilize. They haven't understood yet, because it hasn't been conveyed to them, how you're going to pull those sources together to form a coherent argument, to present the evidence within your overall work. That is now the purpose of the rough draft. At the second time, it also gives you the ability to share your insight with your instructor as to where you're going and how you're going to conclude your work. Because now you can coherently organize thoughts. So your instructor at the academic level, again, will see where you are, what you've done up to this point, and also where you are going. Very, very important ideas to consider as you coherently organize those thoughts. Now, what should the rough draft contain? Well, an introduction. You should be able to introduce your topic to your instructor, to your reader, and clearly state what you hope to do within the overall research. Your thesis. If that's a research proposal, the thesis is going to be that research question, because remember, everything within the work, the body of your work, is going to point back to how that research question could be answered if the research was completed. If it's a research paper, it's going to be basically your statement of purpose. What are you going to complete with the research? What argument are you presenting? What's your focus? You're also going to present your research up to this point. Your arguments, your evidence, all of those ideas that you have as it relates to the overall work. This is going to be presented in the body of the paper. You're also going to share your initial conclusions or your research argument. It's going to be a summation of your work. And that is where we circle back to that concept of having and presenting that coherent organization of thought up to this point. You're also going to provide an outline for incomplete sections, and this is very important. So one of the things I referenced a few moments ago is the fact that you're going to tell your instructor where you're headed. Even if your rough draft is not complete as it relates to your overall project, and like I said, it's not going to be. It's going to be rough. Do include an outline for those incomplete sections, because it's going to be very important for your instructor to know where you're going. And if you don't communicate where you're going, they're not going to have any idea. They're only going to have the information that's presented. So you do want to present your research up to this point, and then also provide an outline for incomplete sections. Now, if you are at the stage of your writing that you feel as though your work is complete, make sure that you communicate that with the instructor as well, because they will need to know that, and they'll need to know your thought process as you prepare to move forward, because we want to keep in mind that the rough draft is not the final writing product. You will then take the rough draft and then move into the final research project, that final draft as it relates to your overall work. So make sure that you are clearly communicating with your instructor where you're at, where you're going, and it's also good to tell them where you think you are at, because that way everybody's on the same page as it relates to a thought process. Now, we also want to keep in mind that the rough draft may not be complete, and this is where that outline for the incomplete section is going to come in, and that's okay. But present your ideas. Make sure that it is very clear to the reader where you stand at this point. That is how you will receive that quality feedback to move into that final draft. Now, I do have two resources I wanted to share. The first is entitled Writing the Rough Draft, and this is a SparkNotes page, and that is a live link on the screen. You can go ahead and click that. And the second is entitled Where Do I Begin? And this is an overall resource that will just assist you with the writing process in general, but it is by the Purdue OWL website. So the Purdue Online Writing Center has provided this resource for you to utilize. And I'd really encourage you to take a look at these, because when we focus on that idea of the rough draft not being perfect, not necessarily being complete, it's important to make sure that it's organized coherently, that it is present in thought, and that you can clearly provide the reader with the information they need to know exactly where you're headed. And when we focus on this idea of the rough draft, I want to make sure that we not only understand the importance of it, but also the importance of completing the rough draft. It is not just another writing assignment. It is going to set you up for success as you move towards your final draft. It goes back to that old adage, if you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're headed. And by telling your instructor where you're at this point in time, they are going to be able to guide you as you move forward. So keep those ideas in mind regarding the importance of the rough draft, and when you think about what it is, why you need to complete it, and why it is important. With that said, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to view this recording. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to your instructor. They are more than happy to assist. And it is vital that you have that open line of communication with your instructor. Thank you.